The sun beat down mercilessly on Jake Morrison's weathered pickup truck as he pulled up to the county courthouse in Cedar Falls, Texas. The 4-year-old construction worker had driven 3 hours from Houston after seeing a peculiar advertisement in the local newspaper. The ad was simple and almost too good to be true. Abandoned ranch property for sale. $50 cash only, no questions asked. Jake had been struggling financially ever since the economic downturn hit the construction industry. His savings were nearly depleted, and he was facing eviction from his small apartment. $50 was almost all he had left, but something about that advertisement called to him. Maybe it was desperation, or maybe it was the adventurous spirit his grandfather had instilled in him with stories of the old Wild West. The courthouse clerk, an elderly woman with silver hair and thick glasses, looked at him skeptically when he inquired about the property. "You sure about this, son?" she asked, peering over her spectacles. "That ranch has been sitting empty for over 30 years. Previous owner died with no heirs. And the county just wants it off their books. But I should warn you, there's no electricity, no running water, and the nearest neighbor is 15 miles away." Jake nodded firmly. "I'll take it." The paperwork was surprisingly simple. Within an hour, Jake found himself holding the deed to 247 acres of Texas rangeland, complete with an old ranch house, a barn, and several outbuildings. The clerk handed him a rusty set of keys and a hand-drawn map showing the location of the property. The drive to the ranch took Jake through increasingly remote countryside. Paved roads gave way to gravel, then to dirt tracks barely wide enough for his truck. Tumbleweeds rolled across his path, and the landscape stretched endlessly in all directions. Nothing but scrub brush, cacti, and the occasional mesquite tree breaking the horizon. When Jake finally reached the property, his heart sank. The ranch house stood like a ghost from another era, its white paint peeling and faded to a dingy gray. Several windows were broken, their glass scattered on the sagging front porch. The roof had multiple holes where shingles had blown away, and the wooden fence surrounding the property had collapsed in several places. But as Jake stepped out of his truck, something stirred within him. Despite its dilapidated condition, there was something majestic about the old house. It was a 2-story structure with a wraparound porch, built in the classic ranch style of the late 1800s. The bones of the building were solid, thick wooden beams and stone foundations that had withstood decades of harsh Texas weather. Jake walked slowly toward the front door, his boots crunching on broken glass and debris. The wooden steps creaked ominously under his weight, but they held. He fumbled with the old keys, until one of them turned in the rusty lock. The door swung open with a prolonged groan, revealing the shadowy interior. The smell hit him first, a mixture of dust, mildew, and something else he couldn't quite identify. Shafts of sunlight streamed through the broken windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. The main room was larger than he had expected, with high ceilings and a massive stone fireplace dominating one wall. Furniture covered in white sheets stood like ghosts throughout the room. Jake pulled away one of the sheets, revealing an ornate Victorian sofa that, despite years of neglect, appeared to be in surprisingly good condition. Another sheet concealed a grandfather clock that had stopped at 3:17, though whether it was morning or afternoon remained a mystery. As Jake explored the ground floor, he discovered a kitchen with an old cast-iron stove, a dining room with a long wooden table that could seat 12 people, and a study lined with empty bookshelves. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, but the furniture was well made and solid, the kind of craftsmanship you rarely saw anymore. The stairs to the second floor groaned under his weight, but they seemed sturdy enough. Upstairs, he found 4 bedrooms and a bathroom with an old clawfoot tub. In the master bedroom, he discovered an ornate wooden chest at the foot of the bed. It was locked, but Jake noticed that one of the keys on his ring looked like it might fit. The key turned easily, and the chest opened with a satisfying click. Inside, Jake found old clothes, yellowed photographs, and documents that appeared to be from the ranch's heyday. The photographs showed the property as it once was, with green pastures, healthy cattle, and the house painted bright white, with flower gardens surrounding it. One photograph particularly caught his attention. It showed a stern-looking man in his 60s standing next to a beautiful woman about half his age. They stood in front of the ranch house when it was new, and the man wore the clothes of a successful rancher. A fine hat, leather boots, and a silver pocket watch chain visible across his vest. On the back of the photograph, someone had written in faded ink, Samuel and Mary Watson, 1892. Among the documents, Jake found old bills of sale, cattle records, and what appeared to be a journal wrapped in oilcloth. The journal's leather cover was cracked with age, but the pages inside were still readable. As Jake flipped through it, he realized it was a detailed account of daily life on the ranch, written in Samuel Watson's careful handwriting. The entries painted a picture of a prosperous cattle operation. Samuel had apparently built the ranch from nothing, starting with just a few head of cattle and gradually expanding his herd and his land holdings. The journal entries spoke of successful cattle drives, good rainfall, and growing wealth. But as Jake read further, the tone of the entries began to change. References appeared to problems with rustlers and increased security measures. Samuel wrote about hiring additional ranch hands and purchasing firearms to protect his property. The entries became increasingly paranoid, with Samuel expressing suspicions about his neighbors and even his own employees. The final entry in the journal was dated October 15, 1893, and it was different from all the others. Samuel's usually neat handwriting was hurried and messy, as if he had been writing in great haste or extreme agitation. "They're coming for me," the entry read. "I've hidden everything where they'll never find it. If something happens to me, Mary knows where to look. The map is behind the stone that doesn't match the others. God help us all." Jake read the entry several times, his heart racing. What had Samuel hidden? Who was coming for him? And what had happened to the prosperous ranch that had apparently vanished into history? As the sun began to set, painting the Texas sky in brilliant oranges and reds, Jake made his way back downstairs. He stood in the main room, looking around at the covered furniture and empty walls, trying to imagine what the house had been like when it was filled with life and laughter. Despite its current condition, Jake could see the potential in the old ranch house. With some work, it could be restored to its former glory. He had the construction skills to fix the roof, replace the broken windows, and repair the damaged walls. It would take time and money he didn't have, but it was possible. More intriguing, however, was the mystery that Samuel Watson's journal had revealed. What had the old rancher hidden? The reference to a map hidden behind a stone suggested that whatever it was might still be on the property, waiting to be discovered after more than a century. Jake spent his first night in the old house, sleeping on the floor of the main room with only his jacket as a pillow. The house settled and creaked around him throughout the night, and he could hear mice scurrying in the walls. But despite the eerie atmosphere, he felt a strange sense of belonging, as if he was meant to be there. When morning came, Jake began his exploration of the property in earnest. The barn was in even worse condition than the house, with half the roof collapsed and the wooden walls warped and weathered. But the stone foundation was solid, and Jake could see where it could be rebuilt. The other outbuildings included a chicken coop, a smokehouse, and what appeared to have been a bunkhouse for ranch hands. All were in various states of decay, but all showed signs of having once been well built and functional. It was while exploring the area around the main house that Jake made his first real discovery. Behind the house, he found what had once been a flower garden, now overgrown with weeds and scrub brush. At the center of the garden stood the remains of a stone fountain, its carved figures worn smooth by decades of wind and weather. The fountain was made of limestone blocks, fitted together with the skill of a master mason. But as Jake examined it more closely, he noticed something odd. Most of the stones were a uniform gray color, weathered to the same shade by years of exposure to the elements. But one stone, about 3 feet from the ground, was slightly different. A bit more reddish in color, as if it had been replaced at some point. Jake's pulse quickened as he remembered Samuel Watson's journal entry. The map is behind the stone that doesn't match the others. Could this be what the old rancher had been referring to? With trembling hands, Jake began to examine the reddish stone more closely. It was fitted tightly into place, but as he ran his fingers around its edges, he could feel that it was slightly loose. Using his pocket knife, he began to carefully pry at the mortar around the stone. After several minutes of careful work, the stone shifted. Jake's heart pounded as he worked the stone free, revealing a small cavity behind it. Inside the cavity, wrapped in what appeared to be oiled leather, was a small bundle. Jake carefully extracted the bundle and unwrapped it. Inside was a folded piece of parchment, yellowed with age but still intact. As he unfolded it, Jake gasped. It was a hand-drawn map of the ranch property, showing not only the house, barn, and other buildings, but also several locations marked with symbols that Jake didn't recognize. One symbol in particular caught his attention. It was drawn at a location about half a mile from the main house, near what the map labeled as Devil's Canyon. The symbol looked like a cross, but with additional markings that suggested it might represent something buried or hidden. As Jake studied the map more carefully, he began to understand what he was looking at. Samuel Watson had created a treasure map, marking the locations of things he had hidden around his property. The question was, what had he hidden, and why? Standing in the overgrown garden with the mysterious map in his hands, Jake realized that his $50 investment had bought him much more than just an abandoned ranch. It had bought him a mystery that stretched back over a century, and the possibility of discoveries that could change his life forever. The sun was climbing higher in the Texas sky, and Jake knew he had a decision to make. He could try to restore the ranch house and make a simple living on the land, or he could follow Samuel Watson's map and see where it led him. Given his desperate financial situation and his naturally curious nature, the choice wasn't difficult to make. Jake carefully refolded the map and tucked it into his shirt pocket. Then he headed back to his truck to get the tools he would need for his treasure hunt. Whatever Samuel Watson had hidden on this land, Jake Morrison was going to find it. Jake spent the next hour gathering supplies from his truck and planning his approach to following Samuel Watson's mysterious map. He had brought basic tools for initial repairs to the ranch house, including a shovel, a crowbar, and a flashlight. Now these tools would serve a very different purpose. The map showed several marked locations scattered across the ranch property, but Jake decided to start with the symbol near Devil's Canyon, since it appeared to be the most prominently marked. According to the map, the canyon was located about half a mile northwest of the main house, beyond a cluster of mesquite trees that still stood exactly where the map indicated they would be. The walk to Devil's Canyon gave Jake time to think about what he might find. Samuel Watson's journal had mentioned hiding something valuable, and the elaborate precautions suggested it was more than just family heirlooms. In the 1,890 seconds, many ranchers didn't trust banks and kept their wealth in gold and silver coins. Perhaps Samuel had buried his life savings somewhere on the property. Devil's Canyon turned out to be a narrow ravine cut into the landscape by decades of flash floods. It wasn't particularly deep, maybe 20 feet at its deepest point, but its steep sides and rocky bottom made it treacherous to navigate. Jake could see why it had earned its ominous name. According to the map, the marked location was on the eastern rim of the canyon, near a distinctive rock formation that looked like a natural bridge. Jake found the spot easily. The rock formation was exactly as depicted on the century-old map, barely changed by the passage of time. The symbol on the map indicated a spot about 10 feet from the edge of the canyon, behind a large boulder. Jake approached the area carefully, studying the ground for any signs that it had been disturbed at some point in the distant past. The Texas soil was hard and rocky, baked by decades of sun, but Jake thought he could detect a slight depression in the earth where the map suggested he should dig. He began digging carefully, not wanting to damage whatever might be buried below. The soil was difficult to work, alternating between hard-packed dirt and loose rocky sections. After digging for about an hour, Jake's shovel struck something solid with a metallic ring. His pulse quickened as he cleared away more dirt, revealing the corner of what appeared to be a metal box. Working more carefully now, Jake excavated around the object, which turned out to be a large iron strongbox, the kind that had been popular in the late 1800s for storing valuables. The box was heavy, too heavy for Jake to lift alone. It was also locked with an ornate but rusty padlock. Jake tried the keys from his ring, but none of them fit. However, the lock was old, and the metal had been weakened by years underground. A few sharp blows with his crowbar broke it open. Jake's hands trembled as he lifted the lid of the strongbox. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth and canvas, were bundles of what appeared to be paper money, along with several leather pouches that clinked with the unmistakable sound of coins when he lifted them. The paper money turned out to be banknotes from the 1,890 remarkably well preserved thanks to the oilcloth wrapping. Jake counted them quickly. There were hundreds of dollars in various denominations, an enormous sum for that era. The leather pouches contained gold and silver coins, also from the 1,890, along with what appeared to be gold nuggets and small pieces of raw silver. But the most intriguing item in the strongbox was another journal. This one much smaller than the one Jake had found in the house. This journal contained what appeared to be a detailed record of Samuel Watson's financial dealings, written in a code that Jake couldn't immediately decipher. As Jake studied the coded journal, he began to notice patterns in the entries. Certain symbols appeared repeatedly, always in association with large sums of money. Other symbols seemed to correspond to dates and locations. It was clearly a sophisticated system that Samuel had developed to keep his business dealings secret. One thing that struck Jake as odd was the sheer amount of wealth that Samuel appeared to have accumulated. Even for a successful rancher, the sums mentioned in the journal seemed extraordinary. Jake began to wonder if Samuel Watson had been involved in something more than just cattle ranching. The intriguing and somewhat troubling. In the 1,890, the Texas frontier was still a wild place where fortunes could be made through means both legal and illegal. Cattle rustling, stagecoach robbery, and claim jumping were common ways for unscrupulous men to acquire wealth quickly. Had Samuel Watson been involved in such activities? Jake carefully rewrapped the money and coins and placed them back in the strongbox. He then consulted the map again to see what other locations Samuel had marked. There were at least 4 more symbols scattered across the property, each potentially marking another cache of hidden wealth. The second location on the map was much closer to the main house, near what the map labeled as the Old Oak. Jake had noticed a massive oak tree about a quarter-mile from the house when he first arrived. It was one of the few large trees on the property, and it appeared to be very old, certainly old enough to have been there in Samuel's time. The walk to the oak tree gave Jake time to process what he had discovered. The strongbox alone contained enough money to change his life completely. Even accounting for the age of the currency, collectors would pay substantial sums for 1,890 banknotes and coins in such good condition. And if the other marked locations contained similar treasures, Jake might have stumbled upon one of the most significant lost treasures in Texas history. The old oak tree was even more impressive up close. Its massive trunk was at least 6 feet in diameter, and its gnarled branches spread out in all directions, creating a canopy of shade that provided relief from the blazing Texas sun. According to the map, the marked location was on the north side of the tree, about 15 paces from the trunk. Jake counted off the paces and began digging again. This time, the digging was easier. The soil under the oak tree was softer and richer, nourished by decades of falling leaves and protected from the harsh sun by the tree's canopy. After about 30 minutes of digging, Jake's shovel struck something hard again, but this time it wasn't metal. As he cleared away more soil, he uncovered what appeared to be a wooden chest, much older and more ornate than the iron strongbox from Devil's Canyon. The wooden chest was locked, but the wood had been weakened by moisture and age. Jake was able to pry it open with his crowbar without too much difficulty. Inside, he found another collection of treasures, but these were different from what he had discovered at the first location. This chest contained jewelry, rings, necklaces, bracelets, and brooches, all of it appearing to be very old and very valuable. There were pieces made of gold and silver, set with what appeared to be precious gems. Some of the jewelry was clearly women's, delicate and ornate in the style of the Victorian era. Other pieces were more masculine, heavy gold rings and pocket watch chains. Among the jewelry, Jake found something even more intriguing: a collection of documents that appeared to be property deeds and legal papers. As he examined them more closely, Jake realized that these documents represented ownership of land. Not just the ranch where he was standing, but properties scattered across Texas, and even into New Mexico. The implications were staggering. Samuel Watson hadn't just been a successful rancher. He had apparently been a major landowner with holdings throughout the Southwest. The documents showed that he had owned silver mines in New Mexico, timber rights in East Texas, and oil leases on land that would later become some of the most productive oil fields in the state. But why had Samuel hidden all of this wealth and these important documents? And what had happened to him that had prevented him from ever returning to claim his treasure? Jake found a partial answer in another coded journal that was hidden beneath the jewelry. This journal contained what appeared to be correspondence between Samuel and various business associates, all written in the same code as the financial records. While Jake couldn't read the code, the dates and locations mentioned in the headers of the letters provided clues about Samuel's activities. The letters suggested that Samuel had been involved in some kind of business partnership that had gone wrong. References to broken agreements and betrayal appeared frequently. Even in the coded text, the final entry in this journal was dated just 3 days before the last entry in the journal Jake had found in the house. As Jake studied the documents and tried to piece together Samuel Watson's story, he began to understand what had happened. Samuel had been a successful businessman with diverse interests throughout the Southwest, but something had gone wrong. A business partnership had turned sour. Or perhaps Samuel had been involved in activities that had attracted the attention of law enforcement. Sensing danger, Samuel had hidden his wealth and important documents in various locations around his ranch, creating the map as a guide for himself or trusted family members to recover the treasure later. But whatever threat Samuel had been fleeing had apparently caught up with him before he could return for his hidden wealth. The sun was beginning to set as Jake carefully repacked the wooden chest and consulted the map again. There were still 3 more marked locations to investigate, but darkness was approaching, and Jake didn't want to be wandering around the ranch property at night with flashlight, potentially attracting unwanted attention from any modern-day treasure hunters who might have heard rumors about the old Watson Ranch. Jake decided to return to the main house for the night. But first he needed to secure the treasures he had already discovered. The strongbox was too heavy to move easily, but the wooden chest was manageable. He decided to bring the chest back to the house and hide it there, then return for the strongbox the next day with better equipment. As Jake walked back to the ranch house carrying the wooden chest, his mind raced with possibilities. The treasure he had already discovered was worth more than he could have imagined when he paid $50 for the property that morning. But the map suggested there was even more to be found. Back at the ranch house, Jake found a secure hiding place for the wooden chest in what had once been a root cellar beneath the kitchen. The cellar was accessible through a trapdoor that was concealed beneath a heavy wooden cabinet. It was the perfect place to hide something valuable. Even if someone searched the house, they were unlikely to discover the hidden cellar. As Jake settled down for his second night in the old ranch house, he reflected on the incredible turn his life had taken in just 2 days. He had come to Texas as a desperate man, with only $50 to his name and no prospects for the future. Now he was potentially sitting on a fortune that could set him up for life. But Jake also realized that his adventure was far from over. There were still 3 more locations on Samuel Watson's map to investigate, and each one might contain treasures as valuable as what he had already found. More importantly, Jake was beginning to understand that Samuel Watson's story was more complex and potentially more dangerous than he had initially realized. The coded journals suggested that Samuel had been involved in business dealings that had made him powerful enemies. These enemies had apparently been willing to use violence to get what they wanted from Samuel. The question that haunted Jake as he lay in the darkness of the old ranch house was whether those enemies, or their descendants, might still be out there, waiting for someone to discover Samuel Watson's hidden wealth. Outside, the Texas wind howled across the empty rangeland, rattling the broken windows of the old house and causing the timbers to creak and groan. Jake pulled his jacket tighter around himself and tried to sleep, but his mind was too active, too excited by the day's discoveries, and too troubled by the mysteries that still remained unsolved. Tomorrow, he would continue following Samuel Watson's map, but tonight, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that he was not alone on the ranch, that somewhere out in the darkness, someone or something was watching and waiting. Whether it was just his imagination fueled by the eerie atmosphere of the abandoned ranch, or whether there was real danger lurking in the shadows. Jake couldn't be sure. All he knew was that he had committed himself to seeing this treasure hunt through to the end, whatever the consequences might be. Jake woke before dawn on his third day at the ranch, startled by the sound of a vehicle approaching the property. Through the broken windows, he could see headlights cutting through the pre-dawn darkness. His heart raced as he grabbed his flashlight and crept to a window where he could get a better view. A black pickup truck had pulled up near his own vehicle, and 3 men were getting out. Even in the dim light, Jake could see that they were armed. One carried what appeared to be a shotgun, while the others had pistols holstered at their sides. They moved with the confidence of men who had been to this ranch before. Jake's mind raced as he tried to figure out what to do. Had these men somehow learned about the treasure he had discovered? Were they descendants of the enemies who had threatened Samuel Watson over a century ago? Or were they simply modern-day treasure hunters who had heard rumors about the old ranch? From his hiding spot, Jake watched as the men split up to search the property. One headed toward the barn, another toward the outbuildings, and the third approached the main house. Jake quickly grabbed the coded journal he had been studying and stuffed it into his jacket pocket, then made his way quietly toward the back of the house. The man approaching the front door moved cautiously but purposefully, as if he knew exactly what he was looking for. Jake could hear him testing the front door, then the sound of heavy boots on the wooden porch as he moved around to check the windows. Jake slipped out the back door and made his way toward the old oak tree, staying low and using whatever cover he could find. If these men were after Samuel Watson's treasure, he needed to get to the remaining cache locations before they did. The map in his pocket showed 3 more marked spots, and Jake realized that whoever these men were, they probably didn't have the complete picture of what Samuel had hidden. As Jake reached the oak tree, he could hear the men searching the main house behind him. They were being systematic but not particularly quiet, confirming Jake's suspicion that they were experienced at this kind of work. He needed to move fast. The third location on Samuel's map was marked near what appeared to be an old windmill. Jake had noticed the broken remains of a windmill about half a mile south of the house, and he headed in that direction, staying low and moving as quietly as possible. The windmill had long since fallen into ruin, its metal blades twisted and broken. Its wooden tower collapsed into a pile of weathered lumber, but the stone foundation remained, and according to the map, that was where Jake needed to look. The marked spot was on the eastern side of the windmill foundation, beneath what the map labeled as the pointing stone. Jake found the stone easily. It was a large piece of limestone that had been carved into a rough arrow shape, probably by Samuel himself as a marker. Jake began digging as quietly as possible, constantly looking over his shoulder for any sign of the armed men. The soil here was harder than at the oak tree, and Jake had to work carefully to avoid making too much noise with his shovel. After about 20 minutes of careful digging, Jake's shovel struck something metallic. This time, it was another iron strongbox, similar to the one he had found at Devil's Canyon, but slightly smaller. Like the first strongbox, it was locked, but Jake was able to break the old padlock with his crowbar. Inside this box, Jake found something completely different from the previous discoveries. Instead of money and jewelry, the box contained what appeared to be legal documents and correspondence. All of it written in clear English, rather than Samuel's code. The documents told a story that made Jake's blood run cold. Samuel Watson hadn't just been a successful rancher and businessman. According to these papers, he had been the leader of a group of men who had been systematically stealing cattle and horses throughout Texas and New Mexico, then selling them through a network of corrupt buyers in Mexico. The operation had been sophisticated and highly profitable, involving dozens of men and spanning several states. But by 1893, law enforcement agencies and rival criminal organizations had begun closing in on Samuel's gang. The documents included wanted posters for Samuel and several of his associates, as well as letters threatening revenge from families whose livestock had been stolen. One letter, in particular, caught Jake's attention. It was written by a man named Marcus Blackwood, whose family had apparently lost their entire herd of cattle to Samuel's gang. Blackwood's letter was filled with rage and promises of vengeance, and he specifically mentioned that he knew about Samuel's ranch and his hidden wealth. "You cannot hide forever, Watson," the letter read. "We know about your ranch, and we know you've buried your stolen fortunes somewhere on that land. When we find you, we'll take back everything you stole from honest families, and we'll make sure you pay for what you've done." The letter was dated October 12, 1893. Just 3 days before Samuel's final, panicked journal entry. Jake now understood what had happened to Samuel Watson. Blackwood and his allies had tracked Samuel to his ranch, and Samuel had realized that his time was running out. But the story didn't end there. Among the documents in the strongbox was a more recent letter, dated only 5 years earlier. It was written by someone who signed himself as M. Blackwood Jr., and was addressed to anyone who might be interested in the Watson treasure. "My great-grandfather Marcus Blackwood spent his entire life hunting for Samuel Watson and the fortune he stole from our family," the letter read. "Though he never found Watson or the treasure, he passed down the story through our family. We know the treasure is still out there, somewhere on the old Watson ranch. If you've found this letter, you've probably found at least part of what Watson hid, but you should know that the Blackwood family still considers that treasure to be stolen property, and we intend to reclaim it." Jake's hands shook as he read the letter. The armed men searching the ranch weren't just random treasure hunters. They were descendants of the families Samuel Watson had wronged, and they had been searching for this treasure for over a century. Jake quickly resealed the strongbox and consulted Samuel's map again. There were 2 more marked locations, but he needed to reach them before Blackwood's men found him. The 4th location was marked near what the map called the Twin Rocks, and Jake thought he knew where that was. There were 2 large boulders about a quarter-mile east of the windmill that stood out prominently against the flat landscape. As Jake made his way toward the Twin Rocks, he could see lights moving around the ranch house behind him. The men had apparently finished searching the buildings and were now expanding their search to the surrounding area. Jake estimated that he had maybe an hour before they reached his current location. The Twin Rocks were exactly where Jake expected them to be. 2 massive boulders that had probably been deposited there by a glacier millions of years ago. The marked spot on the map was between the 2 rocks, and Jake began digging immediately. This time, his shovel struck wood rather than metal. As he cleared away the soil, Jake uncovered a large wooden box, much bigger than anything he had found before. The box was heavy and awkward to handle, but Jake managed to get it open with his crowbar. Inside, Jake found the most valuable treasure yet. The box contained bars of silver and gold, probably worth hundreds of thousands of dollars at current precious metals prices. There were also bags of gold coins, some of which appeared to be rare collector's items that would be worth far more than their gold content. But the most significant discovery was a leather portfolio containing what appeared to be the original land grants and property deeds for all of Samuel Watson's holdings. These documents showed that Samuel had acquired legal title to vast tracts of land throughout Texas and New Mexico, land that was now worth millions of dollars if the claims were still valid. Jake realized that he wasn't just looking at stolen cattle money. Samuel Watson had apparently used his ill-gotten gains to purchase legitimate land holdings, effectively laundering his criminal profits through real estate investments. The documents in the portfolio showed properties that included not just ranch land, but also mining claims, timber rights, and even early oil leases. As Jake studied the land grants, he began to understand the true scope of what he had discovered. If these property claims were still valid, and if Jake could prove his ownership of them through his purchase of the original ranch, he wouldn't just be wealthy. He would be one of the largest landowners in the Southwest. But first, he needed to survive the next few hours. The lights from the searchers were getting closer, and Jake could now hear their voices carrying across the desert air. He quickly closed the wooden box and checked Samuel's map one more time. The final marked location was the most intriguing of all. It was marked with a different symbol than the others, and it was located at the ranch house itself. Specifically, in what the map labeled as the false wall. Jake had been sleeping in that house for 2 nights, without realizing that there might be another hidden treasure right under his nose. Jake made his way back toward the ranch house, staying low and moving from cover to cover. The armed men had moved their search to the area around the barn and the outbuildings, giving Jake a chance to slip back into the house undetected. Inside the house, Jake used his flashlight to search for any signs of a false wall. He remembered that one wall of the main room had seemed oddly thick when he had first explored the house. Using his pocket knife, Jake tapped along the wall until he heard a hollow sound that indicated empty space behind the wood paneling. It took Jake several minutes to find the mechanism that opened the false wall. But eventually he discovered that one of the wooden panels could be slid aside to reveal a hidden compartment. Inside the compartment was a single item that made Jake's heart stop. It was a modern safe deposit box key, along with a note written in contemporary handwriting. The note was signed by someone named Sarah Watson Reynolds and was dated just 10 years earlier. To whoever finds this key. The note read, "My name is Sarah Watson Reynolds, and I am Samuel Watson's great-granddaughter. My family has been searching for Samuel's treasure for generations, not because we want to profit from his crimes, but because we want to make restitution to the families he wronged. This key opens a safe deposit box at the First National Bank of Austin, where I have placed a complete record of all the families Samuel stole from, along with instructions for how to return their stolen property to their descendants. If you've found Samuel's treasure, please use this information to do the right thing. The sins of the past don't have to define the future." Jake stared at the note, his mind reeling. Sarah Watson Reynolds had apparently been conducting her own search for her ancestors' hidden wealth, but for entirely different reasons than the Blackwood family. While the Blackwoods wanted to reclaim what they saw as their property, Sarah wanted to make amends for her ancestors' crimes. The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted Jake's thoughts. The armed men had finished searching the outbuildings and were heading back toward the house. Jake quickly pocketed the safe deposit box key and the note, then made his way to the back of the house. As he slipped out the back door, Jake came face to face with one of the armed men. For a moment, neither of them moved, both too surprised to react. Then, the man reached for his weapon. "Don't move," the man said. "You must be the one who bought this place. My name is Robert Blackwood, and you've found something that belongs to my family." Jake raised his hand slowly. "I don't want any trouble," he said. "I'm just a guy who bought an old ranch for $50. I didn't know about any of this history." Blackwood studied Jake's face in the moonlight. "But you found something, didn't you? Samuel Watson's treasure. My family has been looking for it for over 100 years. I found some old documents and a little bit of money," Jake admitted. "But I also found something else you should know about. Your family isn't the only one who's been searching for this treasure." Jake pulled out Sarah Reynolds' note and handed it to Blackwood. As the man read it by flashlight, his expression changed from anger to confusion to something that might have been hope. "She's been looking for the same thing we have," Blackwood said slowly. "But for the opposite reason. Blackwood, maybe it's time to stop fighting over the past and start working together to fix it," Jake suggested. "I don't need stolen money. But if this treasure can be used to right old wrongs, then maybe that's what should happen." Blackwood was quiet for a long moment. Then he called out to his companions. When they approached, he showed them Sarah's note and explained the situation. To Jake's surprise, the other men seemed relieved rather than disappointed. "We've been carrying this anger for 4 generations, one of them said. "Maybe it's time to put it to rest." Over the next several hours, Jake led the Blackwood men to the locations where he had hidden Samuel Watson's treasure. Together, they cataloged everything he had found, creating a complete inventory of the stolen wealth and the legitimate property claims. When the sun rose on Jake's 4th day at the ranch, he was no longer alone on the property. Robert Blackwood had called his family, and Sarah Watson Reynolds had been contacted through the bank in Austin. By noon, representatives from both families were at the ranch, along with a lawyer who specialized in historical property claims. The resolution that emerged was both simple and elegant. The stolen money and goods would be distributed among the documented victims of Samuel Watson's crimes, using Sarah Reynolds' research to identify the descendant families. The legitimate property claims would be jointly owned by Jake, as the current owner of the original ranch, and the Watson family trust that Sarah had established. Jake's $50 investment had indeed changed everything, not just for him, but for dozens of families who had been affected by Samuel Watson's crimes over a century earlier. The oil rights alone on the properties Samuel had legitimately purchased were worth millions of dollars, enough to provide restitution to all the affected families, and still leave Jake financially secure for life. But perhaps more importantly, Jake had helped to heal wounds that had been festering for generations. The Blackwood family's anger was finally put to rest, and Sarah Watson Reynolds was able to fulfill her dream of making amends for her ancestors' crimes. As Jake stood on the front porch of the old ranch house 6 months later, watching construction crews restore the building to its former glory, he reflected on the incredible journey that had brought him to this point. He had come to Texas as a desperate man with no prospects, and he was now a wealthy landowner with a purpose that went far beyond personal gain. The ranch house would soon be restored and converted into a museum dedicated to the history of the Texas frontier, including the complex story of Samuel Watson and the families affected by his crimes. The museum would serve as a reminder that the past never truly disappears, but that it's never too late to make things right. Jake had learned that sometimes the greatest treasures aren't gold and silver, but the opportunity to heal old wounds and bring justice to those who have been wronged. His $50 gamble had paid off in ways he never could have imagined, changing not just his own life, but the lives of everyone connected to the long-buried secrets of the old Watson Ranch.